Welcome back. Since we covered introductory paragraphs during our last session, it would only make sense for us to discuss conclusion paragraphs now. So, traditionally, when talking to students, it seems that conclusions are paragraphs that students tend to feel the least confident about, whether we are discussing take home essays or TWAs. So, my hope for today is to give you some ideas that you can have in regards to what to potentially include in a conclusion, whether it be a take home essay or a TWA. But obviously, for our purposes for this year, we're really looking at what would be going into a conclusion for your AP exam, rhetorical analysis. So the hope is that you at least have some ideas kind of in the back of your mind as to what could be worthwhile for that conclusion for that essay. But first, let's take a look at the sample introduction, or at a sample introduction. You guys did an introductory paragraph for the Margaret Thatcher Ronald Reagan prompt, and already submitted that and got feedback back. So I wanted to kind of go over a sample one here as to whether or not this one would be good or great. So pause the video and read this paragraph and decide whether or not this paragraph would be considered good or great. So give it a pause, read the paragraph. Okay, so hopefully you have read the paragraph, and the final answer is this introduction would be considered great. It's a nice start to a rhetorical analysis essay, and here's some things to take note of. There's a reference to the broader context, to losing a figure before narrowing in on Ronald Reagan. So to lose a figure who once acted as a uniting and reassuring voice to a divided and anxious group is never easy. This is a broader context of what's going on before getting into those kind of specifics of Ronald Reagan. Additionally, the writer does incorporate his or her own style with, quote, a uniting and reassuring voice, as well as divided and anxious group. The language not fancy or magical, but it is well written and it's purposeful. So there's a preciseness, there's a reason, there's a purpose that's going on with the language that is used. The rhetorical situation is also covered with mentioning Thatcher, hardship, eulogy, and American public. So that idea of the audience, the speaker, the message, the context overall, those things are covered in here with that rhetorical situation, which you see highlighted in red. And then there is a clear thesis statement. Thatcher, however, rose up through this hardship to deliver a rallying yet somber eulogy to the American public. Embedded within this piece is a message of hope, which Thatcher is able to convey through a strong appeal to pathos, a first-person point of view, and rallying buzzwords. And one thing I like about those rhetorical devices is they're very relatable, pathos. So you have that emotional appeal, first person point of view, the anecdotes, those experiences that she has in rallying buzzwords. Certainly diction is really what she's taking a look at, or what this writer's taking a look at with the rallying buzzwords, but it's written in a language, that is very universal, that is very relatable, conversational, and it still ultimately gets the job done. So again, when it comes to writing those thesis statements in that introduction, certainly the more precise you can be with your rhetorical devices, the better. But if you can't come up with that specific term, and especially when it comes to things of types of syntax and repetition, you can certainly go with, traditional everyday language, and the explanation is really what's going to count the most when it comes to that overall analysis. So I don't want you losing time trying to think of what is that precise term that I need to use for my thesis statement with those rhetorical devices. So there is a clear thesis, and the paragraph as a whole falls into that 3 to 5 sentence range. In this case, I believe we are taking a look at 4 sentences specifically, although that last sentence, is a compound sentence. Compound complex sentence, so really you could even say it's essentially 5 sentences. So this is a very doable introduction, and this is one that is more than just simply being good. It would be kind of considered on that great scale. So kind of take a look at your introduction, see how it stacks up with this one. Should have received some feedback and comments already, from me back on it, but this kind of gives you an idea, comparison as to what a great introduction would be able to look like. And hey, in some cases, some of yours might even be better than certainly what this one is. All right, so today's goal. Already mentioned we looked at introductions, so now we're going to be taking a look at conclusions. So today's goal is to construct a sophisticated conclusion for a rhetorical analysis essay. Like the introduction, writing the conclusion should not take longer than 5 minutes. So you don't want to be spending 10, 15 minutes certainly on a conclusion or an introduction. Combined between your introduction and conclusion, you're looking at about 10 minutes, which would then give you, in that ballpark of 30, 35 minutes to be able to write your body paragraphs, although certainly you have to take into account some time to read the passage. Keep in mind the passage this year is supposed to be a little bit shorter than what has been in previous years, so that makes it a little bit more accessible and easier to read on a screen, if you're using an iPad or a smartphone to be taking your AP exam. Certainly, this can be difficult, though, just than spending the 5 minutes, not longer than 5 minutes, but at least 5 minutes due to the constraints of the essay, due to those overall time constraints, because, really those body paragraphs are the main point of emphasis that you are certainly looking at. And then the last thing with today's goal is it's the opportunity to provide some insight, to kind of close your essay. So I think the conclusion is still something, though, that people get a little bit concerned about because, from some personal experiences, you're really kind of rushing towards the end of that essay to try to fit in those last few remarks, and so the idea of taking 3 to 4 to 5 minutes at the end to devote it to a conclusion might sound a little bit arduous at this point. So I simply want to remind you, everything is fine and everything is going to be fine. The conclusion ranks last in that pecking order, when it comes to the significance, the importance of your essays. Body paragraphs are critical. So make sure that your body paragraphs are constructed the way that you want them. However, the conclusion or those conclusions, for multiple ones of us, help to bring an obvious, end and closure to that essay where we can provide some insight. So it gives you an opportunity to have your final say, but what I don't want you to do is simply settle for a 1 to 2 sentence conclusion when you still do have 5 minutes left of writing time. So you really should be using up all of that writing time to construct your response, your essay. If you are done and you still have 3 to 5 minutes left, chances are there probably was more elaboration that could have been taken advantage of that you failed to do. So I want to make sure that you understand what you can incorporate into a conclusion to make it effective should that time be there. But I do not want you to fret or stress over not having enough time to spend 5 minutes on your conclusion, because those body paragraphs really are going to be, the main emphasis. If you only have a 1 or 2 sentence conclusion, it can still be okay. It can still get the job done. It can still certainly be good. But for today, the hope is that we can go over things that, should you have more time, that you can elaborate on in a conclusion. And these would also be things to kind of take with you going on into future essay, writing assignments, regardless of the English course that you're taking or high school, college level, so that when you do write a conclusion, you can still incorporate these ideas certainly into it. All right, so constructing conclusions for rhetorical analysis. Good conclusions basically bring the essay to a unified end. So in 1 or 2 sentences, you bring closure. You're probably going to summarize the main ideas that you were kind of taking a look at, and you're going to bring, just a sense of closure. There's unity, cohesiveness, continuity to the essay. It certainly is going to make sense. But great conclusions, just like we talked about with introductions, are going to engage and or focus the audience. And they're going to do this through a number of ways. Explaining the significance of the argument within a broader text. So kind of like how we were just looking at that example with the Thatcher-Reagan introduction, we're kind of introducing that broader context. You're now explaining the significance of this example and how it fits this singular example into a broader, more unified context. You're making connections. You're making connections as to how this could certainly relate and have a natural extension kind of beyond the argument. You could be calling the audience to act. Now that's probably going to happen more so in an argumentative essay, synthesis or a DRQ as opposed to rhetorical analysis. But in general, you could be calling some kind of action, suggesting a change in behavior or attitude. Certainly within the confines of rhetorical analysis, you could be looking at that change that the speaker is trying to get in behavior or attitude. Abigail Adams would be a good example of this. How is she trying to change the way that John Quincy Adams is acting, or at least the way that he is perceiving things that's going around? proposing a solution, leave the audience with a compelling image, explaining implications, summarizing the argument, and then connecting back to the introduction. So these parts here that I have underlined, explaining the significance of the argument within a broader text, making connections, explaining implications, connecting to the introduction, these are really the ones that probably work best when it comes to a rhetorical analysis. And over here on the side, just have some examples of using vivid language. So just like a lot of these tips and details that we talked about with an introduction, that vivid language, that leaving the audience with a compelling image could be a way that you use that vivid language. Making sure that your conclusion relates and is a natural extension would be an important thing, because you want to make sure that you can kind of support the generalization that you're coming to, that extension that you're coming to. You want to avoid that leap in logic. So, if you're taking a look at, Abigail Adams with the John Quincy Adams, you're certainly making a natural extension that she believes that this could therefore, lead her son to be a worthwhile and experienced, maybe not experienced, but an excellent statesman, in his future. But you want to avoid making leaps in logic that she believes that he's going to become the greatest human being who's ever lived, and she feels that she is the greatest mother who's ever lived by giving him such advice. You're just making a leap at that point that doesn't make sense. Strong transitions are certainly good, whether it be at the beginning of the paragraph, avoiding in conclusion, but strong transitions leading into that paragraph and then kind of linking these ideas. But you do want to keep it relatively brief. You don't want a 10-minute conclusion, because now that means that something was taken away from your body paragraphs that should be there. So really, you're still in that 3 to 5 sentences for a great conclusion. It's not something that has to keep going on and on and on and on. So I have attached, here with the Edpuzzle assignment, I've attached a sample essay for the Madeleine Albright response that we were taking a look at when it came to the introduction. So I want you to pause and read the sample. I want you to focus on understanding the student's interpretation of the commencement address that Madeleine Albright, former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, makes. But I want you to read both the intro and the body paragraph. So don't just settle for the intro. Take a look at the body paragraphs. It gives you examples of ways that people can kind of address this prompt, that you took a look at with your introduction, with the introduction paragraphs that we were looking at, since you wrote for the Margaret Thatcher one. But I want you to see what the argument is that this student is making, so that we can then take a look at conclusion paragraphs and decide, are they ultimately going to be good or are they going to be great? So pause the video, pull up that Albright student sample. I have the introduction paragraph here, just so you have a point of reference. Take a look at that essay, then unpause, come back, and we'll take a look at the rest of the video. Okay, hopefully you paused, read the essay. So we're going to take a look at a couple conclusions here. I think I have 3 total. And I want to give you some student samples so that you can get the sense as, okay, is this going to be good or is this going to be great? So potential conclusion number 1. In her commencement address to the graduating class of Mount Holyoke College, Secretary of State Madeleine Albright models the power women can wield by contrasting hypotheticals with reality, providing anecdotes of women facing adversity, and encouraging the graduates to persevere. Albright motivates and inspires the women to make a difference regardless of challenges they face. This is definitely acceptable. All right, I have no complaints if this is a conclusion that you were to write, for this essay. But is it good or is it great? And it's a good conclusion. It definitely does bring closure to the essay. It connects back to that thesis statement, by contrasting the hypotheticals, providing anecdotes, encouraging the graduates to persevere. So it is making those connections. And it's 1 to 2 sentences. It's 2. Basically, we have 1 sentence that's kind of reminding us of the circumstance, the context that's going on, and we have 1 sentence that's really kind of going back to that introduction. So there is a sense of cohesiveness. They're wrapping up what they said they would do, which is good, and it's a good, strong conclusion. It's not anything that's going to make me feel, with this paragraph on its own, that this essay should now go to sophisticated. The evidence and commentary is not going to be part of really the criteria for the conclusion, but there's nothing about this one that is making me go, this person has a better understanding than maybe some of the other essays that certainly would have been read. Now, here are two different conclusions, both again going back to what could be potentially for this sample essay. But why are both of these great? So, again, take a few minutes, pause the video, read both conclusions that we have right here on the screen, and I want you to kind of come to your own conclusion about these conclusions as to what is it that specifically makes these great as compared to this one that was simply good. And I certainly want to have things beyond, well, it's 3 to 5 sentences, but what specifically makes these great? All right, so pause the video, and then we'll take a look at the first option. All right, so for this first option, what makes it great? Well, it connects to the introduction, but it does so in a more convincing and compelling way than the previous example did. You know, breaking the glass ceiling, we're coming back to that idea that was brought up in, I believe it was the second sentence of the introduction for this essay. So you have that kind of full circle idea that's coming back to this idea about that glass ceiling that is restricting women. So we're coming back to those opening sentences of the essay, mirrors the end with the beginning, so you have that nice, continuity, cohesiveness that exists there within the essay. And also, with this kind of closing statement, Albright motivates and inspires the women to make a difference regardless of the challenges they face. This begins to reference the larger significance of the words that she's using. So rather than simply that, hey, they can persevere no matter what, she motivates and inspires the women to make a difference regardless of the challenges they face. Now the argument is getting extended beyond simply what she addresses in this commencement address, but it is now that, hey, no matter what kind of challenge is coming your way, you should now be able to face it and deal with it. So that larger significance, why this matters concept is being addressed here in the closing. So you can see that it's more of like subtle additions. It's not an overarching change, sweeping changes that are being made to the paragraph, but it's some subtle additions that are being made that are making it more effective, and in this case, taking it into that kind of great category. So again, by great, it doesn't mean that this is going to be the greatest thing that has ever been written before, but we have now the sense that that understanding of the passage, the implication, those complexities, those nuances are being recognized by the reader, and now that is getting communicated through the conclusion. Second one, again, what is it that makes this one great? I'll give you another chance to read it in case you did not do so. All right, now for this paragraph, it's certainly kind of taking a little bit of a different approach. Still, main argument, is all the same because we're contrasting the hypotheticals, we're providing the anecdotes, we're encouraging the graduates to persevere. But this one sets the scene more so through stylistic, vivid language. There's a compelling image. The young women clad in their caps and gowns and anxious for an uncertain world were eager to glean advice from Albright's words as a beacon to guide their future. That's the compelling image that's going on. There's that vivid language with, the simile as a beacon to guide their future. It's not dominating, though, Albright's words. It's not trying to one-up Albright because we still, now we're taking a look at her commencement address, to the graduating class by contrasting the hypotheticals with reality, providing anecdotes of women facing adversity, encouraging the graduates to persevere. Albright motivates and inspires the women to make a difference regardless of the challenges they face. We're reinforcing that argument from the introduction. But the main thing that makes this one a little bit different is it's going more with that compelling scene. So when you take a look at these two, the first one is doing more of that unification with that glass ceiling idea for the introduction. This one is doing a little bit more to kind of set the scene, provide a compelling scene, and a little bit more stylistic language. So there's multiple approaches that you can certainly take to having a great conclusion as well as a great introduction, but I want you to kind of really start thinking about, all right, probably for conclusion, what is that larger significance? What's the extension of the argument in a natural way, not something that we're taking unnecessary leaps here, but what would be basically the why should I care kind of idea after reading the essay and the analysis. What is it here that the author is really trying to speak to? When we talked about independent reading essays, we had that overall significance to the meaning of the work as a whole. What's that overall significance to the meaning of life that the speaker, that the writer, that the author is trying to get across to his or her audience. That's certainly a main idea that you can end with. And as long as it doesn't go, beyond the realms of logic, that can be a really nice way to end the essay as a whole. So, good conclusions. Typically 1 to 2 sentences. It's going to summarize the essay. Has some new words and language where it's not just a carbon copy of what that introduction was. So you don't want to rewrite the thesis statement. You do want to, even though you have the same ideas and you're summarizing the essay, you still have some different language that's kind of coming in, so that it doesn't sound like you just did a copy and paste, of your introduction. But a great essay, or one that's going to be awesome, is going to be more in those 3 to 5 sentences. So your intro and your conclusion kind of mirror one another so far as content. The body paragraph should be lengthier, but your intro and conclusion should be pretty close to the same length. But in those 3 to 5 sentences, you're still summarizing the essay, but you're including at least one of the following, if not more. Something about the larger significance. What's the broader context of the argument? What are some connections that you can now make? And you can think back to that rhetorical situation idea, with the message and the exigence and purpose and all of those things. What are the implications of the argument? So if someone maybe is doing a speech or a letter where there's a call to action, what could the implication of this call to action ultimately be? You could provide a compelling image, as we did before, or certainly make some connections to the introduction. And I think really that connection to the introduction probably should be happening for all great essays or all great conclusions, and then you have that compelling image or that larger significance. My suggestion, I think for most students, is that larger significance and connections to the introduction are probably the 2 more attainable ways. The compelling image could be kind of difficult depending upon what is the scenario, the situation, of that prompt that you're dealing with. I think the larger significance and the connection to the introduction can be a little bit more universal. However, you could certainly do a compelling image. Maybe something is coming to you in the conclusion that you weren't really thinking about during the introduction, and so maybe now you can add a little bit more detail to that. All right, your assignment, and I'm sure you could probably have guessed this already since we did a sample introduction for our introduction piece. We're going to do a sample conclusion here for our conclusion piece. So taking a look at the same prompt, the Margaret Thatcher prompt, write a conclusion for the prompt and submit it through Google Classroom. So take your introduction, use those same rhetorical devices. I don't need you to write the body paragraphs for this, but I want you to write a 3 to 5 sentence, or you go up to 6 at most, conclusion. But I want to make sure you limit yourself to 5 minutes. But what would be a good conclusion for this specific piece? All right. So you've received your introduction back. Take a look at that introduction. Certainly, the idea of making some connections to it would be good. If now, after thinking about it, there's more of a compelling image that you can make, available to your reader through your conclusion, you can do that. If there are some broader significances, there's some ways that you're able to kind of extend the meaning, the significance. You can make a significant implication about the passage, the argument. Go ahead and do that. But for this, all I need you to do is write a conclusion, just so you kind of get some practice with that. Next week, we're going to culminate this all together. You've done now a sample intro, sample conclusion, sample body paragraph from the Abigail Adams letter to John Quincy Adams. Next week, you're going to be receiving a prompt, and we're going to put all of this together so that you have a nice conclusion, at least a couple body paragraphs, conclusion, feel good about where you're at writing-wise going on into the AP exam here on May the 20th. All right. Questions, by all means, let me know. Feel free to send those to me. Good luck as you continue working with your college application essays, as you're doing your peer editing rough drafts. Let me know if you have any questions about that as well. But hope everyone is doing well, and I will talk to you later. Have a good one.